being rewarded for their faith. Hello, Russell and Linda. Just a reminder, they have been preaching, okay? They've been preaching in another church. They don't normally come to church this late. They're always on time. So instead of being rewarded for their faith, here are the Jewish believers finding themselves harassed and persecuted. This is not the abundant life that they were expecting. This is not the abundant life that they had been promised. They're wavering in their faith right now. And with some considering a switch back to Judaism, the temptation to drift is very strong when you're in that situation. But drift is dangerous. Drift is dangerous. And I just want to use two pictures to convey the dangers of drift. And they're all experiences that I had when I came to Australia. Fishing. I've never fished in my entire life until I came to Australia. Now I love fishing. I'm still not a hardcore fisherman, but I can put up with maybe 2 hours, and that's it. If I can't catch anything by then, I'm gone. But I remember fishing with someone else, and someone said, "Oh, we're going to drift." You heard that term? We're going to drift. It means they're going to pull the anchor up and let the boat drift along with the current. And you throw your line over and just drift along with the current and see what you fish out. And sometimes, of course, your line gets tangled that way. Well, that was the first time I heard about that technique. I thought you throw bombs in the water, and blow the fish up. But you drift. You let your boat drift. Now, the danger with drifting, number one, is you just don't know where you're going to end up. That's the danger of drift. You don't know where that drift takes you. You don't know where the current of life takes you unless you anchor your life in something. And the writer of the Hebrews is saying, anchor your faith in the words of Christ and in the teachings of Christ and the message of Christ. Because if you don't, you will drift. That's the first danger of drift. You don't know where you're going to end up. Picture number two. Again, it's an Australian experience for me. Swimming in Australian beaches. I never realized it was so treacherous. Because in Malaysia, the currents are just calm as anything. You can just go in and relax. And here, boy, I didn't realize. Nobody told me about the currents. That's why when you watch shows like Bondi and all those, you notice how many of the people they save are Asians. I'm not being racist. That's just a fact. And I am certain that they have not been told about the current. The current in the beaches in Australia is just treacherous. And I found that out myself. A couple of times I nearly died until I realized, okay, there's a current. But then I didn't realize that the current, you swim in between the flags. Then I thought, all right, swim in between the flags. That's the safest part. So in my head I thought, well, there must be no current in between the flags. That's why they tell you to swim in between the flags. That's why I thought. So off I go, swimming away. I would start on this side, swimming away. And then I would be down here. And I only know because I see the flags. Without the flags, I would not know I'd be drifting. You understand that? The flags were the pointers. The flags were the markers for me to know how far I was drifting so that I can then, either go back to the shore and then walk and then start all over again. That was the second thing I learned about swimming on Australian beaches. That even when you swim in between the flags, you will still drift. But I only am alerted to my drift because of those flags. That's the second thing about drifting. It is very gradual. It is subtle. You drift and you don't even realize that you're drifting into dangerous waters, and sometimes it's too late. You're caught up in a very awkward situation. The dangers of drift. Here's some possible symptoms and causes of drift. I've put them together, and you can figure out for yourself which are symptoms and which are causes. And in some cases, they're both symptoms and causes. Number one, pain and hardship. When we're in the midst of pain and hardship, the temptation to look for greener pasture becomes very alluring and particularly difficult to resist. That's just a fact. When we're in a lot of pain, when things happen to us or happen to loved ones that we just don't quite understand, it just seems so unjust and so unfair, those are times when we are tempted to switch off, to turn off the lights and go to bed, or to shut down everything and just cut yourself off from the world. It's very tempting, isn't it? You're in a lot of pain, to remove yourself from everybody and everything. And you read about that. Parents who lose their children, parents who are in that instance, they cope differently. But sometimes the father or the mother or one of the spouses who find that a lot more difficult even cuts off the other spouse because that's the only way they can cope and manage what's happening around them. Disobedience. Unbelief. Unbelief is a refusal and rejection of God and His truth. Yeah? Knowing what's true, what's right, but still we reject it. And in the book of Hebrews, disobedience and unbelief are connected. They're linked. Another one, disconnection from God. Can be a symptom of drift. It can be the cause of drift. Self-imposed exile, disconnection from others. We find ourselves isolating ourselves, not even knowing it, from others. We stop relating, or we keep relating at a very shallow level. Perhaps it's born out of our disillusionment with God, disillusionment with people. Cynicism. Hardness of heart. It's another symptom of drift that I find as I counsel people and work with people. People become cynical. Try and tell them about anything positive, their response is cynicism. It's a hardness of heart. You know? It's not even apathy. It's just this. Physically as Adrian is, but in their heart they're like, really? Yeah, whatever. If that's what you believe. Sluggishness, an apathy about God and spirituality. Just want to read to you 3 verses from Hebrews that identify all these symptoms we've talked about. Hebrews 3, verses 12 to 16. See to it, brothers, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. But encourage one another daily as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. We're going to apply that a little bit more in our communion. Encouraging one another as a means of keeping us from drifting. We have come to share in Christ if we hold firmly till the end the confidence we had at first. As has just been said, today if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion. Who were they who heard and rebelled? Were they not all those Moses led out of Egypt? And with whom was He angry for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the desert? And to whom did God swear that they would not never enter His rest, if not to those who disobeyed? So we see that they were not able to enter because of their unbelief. So you see the interchangeable nature of disobedience and unbelief. We're not able to enter into our inheritance. We're not able to bear fruit, if you remember my message 2 weeks ago, because of this unbelieving heart that often leads to disobedient acts. Hebrews 5:11, verse 14. We have much to say about this. By that, the writer is talking about Jesus being the great high priest. But it is hard to explain because you are slow to learn. In fact, though by this time you ought to be teachers, you ought to be more mature than where you are. Yet you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's Word all over again. You need milk when you should be eating solid food. Anyone who lives on milk still being an infant is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. The words they're slow to learn. In the New American Standard Version and the New King James, it says dull of hearing. See, there's a dullness in our hearing abilities. We hear the same message day in and day out. We read the same books day in, day out. But somehow the truths that releases people, somehow the truths that bring such incredible freedom to others, doesn't happen to us. And the writer here is saying that's because there's a dullness in your heart. There's a dullness in your spirit. In the Message Bible, it says you have a bad habit of not listening. And ladies, you understand that, don't you, about men? Sometimes men, we're there, but we're not really there. And our spouses know, honey, you're not here. The lights are on, darling, but no one is home. That's what they're talking about. Husband, you're not really listening. Well, that's what the writer here is saying. You're listening, but you're not really listening. You're not letting what you're hearing sink to your heart. You're not letting what you're hearing with your head sink and touch your heart. Because it's only when truth touches one's heart that is when someone is changed and transformed. On the way here, I saw this wonderful line on the billboard. Many books inform, but the Bible is the only book that transforms. But for some, people treat the Bible like an information book. It is possible to treat this as a historical, informational book, and for it to make no difference. And you read about that in the book of Hebrews. Hebrews 6, verses 10 to 12. God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown him as you have helped his people and continue to help him. We want each of you to show the same diligence to the very end in order to make your hope sure. We do not want you to become lazy, but to imitate those who through faith and patience inherit what has been promised. The word lazy, become lazy. In the New American Standard Version, it says sluggish. Don't become sluggish. In the NLT version, don't become spiritually dull and indifferent. In the Phillips Bible, it says, don't grow slack. In the Amplified version, don't be disinterested. Don't be spiritual sluggards. Oh, nice words, aren't they? You encourage? Don't be all these things. The writer to the Hebrews is not just having a go at them because he's mean and a hard taskmaster. He's saying, don't drift, guys. This is so critical. What I've taught you, what you have heard is so critical. Hang on to it. Even though everything within you wants to quit, wants to drift, don't. And watch out for these symptoms when you have them. And so how do we keep our faith drift-proof? For that, I want to refer to you the message that I brought from John 15. I'm not going to go into it, but you remember that, some of you, most of you, if not.